headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. It's probably safe to say that many North Carolinians are thinking about the NCAA today. But that's not just because the University of North Carolina Tar Heels are facing off against Gonzaga in tonight's NCAA men's basketball championship. It marks the second straight year that UNC has made the tournament finals. But the road to the Final Four was a bit harder this year for the Tar Heels. Unlike many past years, UNC had to make it without playing any tournament games in its home state. That's because the NCAA pulled all regional games from the state to protest the North Carolina HB2, which denied transgender people use of the bathroom, changing room, or locker room that matches their gender identity.
Well, last week, North Carolina lawmakers repealed the law, but the new law is also facing criticism, and the NCAA is now weighing whether tournament games should be allowed in the state again. Under the new law, transgender people will be able to use the bathroom matching their gender identity, it's believed. But municipal governments will be prohibited from enacting anti-discrimination ordinances through 2020. In addition, the law denies employment and housing protections to the LGBTQ community. Democratic Governor Roy Cooper signed the legislation Thursday while acknowledging its shortcomings.
This is not a perfect deal, and it is not my preferred solution. It stops short of many things we need to do as a state. In a perfect world, with a good General Assembly, we would have repealed House Bill 2 fully today and added full statewide protections for LGBT North Carolinians. Unfortunately, our supermajority Republican legislature will not pass these protections. But this is an important goal that I will keep fighting for. Now, House Bill 2 created a misguided, unworkable, and unnecessary requirement that individuals use the bathroom that match the gender on their birth certificate. Today's law immediately removes that restriction. It's gone.
Governor Roy Cooper's signature came on Thursday's deadline, set by the NCAA for the repeal of HB2. The association said its governing board was reviewing the new law and would soon decide whether to extend the boycott of tournament games worth billions of dollars to North Carolina's economy.
Well, for more, we're joined by two guests. James Essex is director of the ACLU LGBT and HIV Project. In North Carolina, Chapel Hill, we're joined by Joaquin Carcano, who is a plaintiff in the ACLU lawsuit against North Carolina, a transgender man who works as a project coordinator at the Institute for Global Health and Infectious Disease at the University of North Carolina. We want to welcome you both to Democracy Now! James Essex, let's begin with you. It is very hard to understand what actually was passed and repealed on Friday. Please explain. Is HB2 still in any way on the books?
Well, what happened was HB2 was repealed, but it was replaced with something that does just about the same kind of terrible things to the LGBT community that HB2 did. So let's take HB2 in two parts. It did two major things. The first thing is that it barred cities and counties from having LGBT non-discrimination ordinances. That was a permanent ban. Now it's a ban through 2020. So there's a change, but not a big change. Certainly nothing on the ground now anytime soon. The piece of HB2 that got much more attention nationwide, appropriately, was the anti-trans portion of HB2, which said that trans people were barred from using the restrooms that matched their gender identity. Instead, they had to use restrooms that matched the gender marker on their birth certificate, regardless of whether they had managed to change that gender marker or not. That explicit bar on the use of restrooms by trans people has gone, but it's been replaced by nothing, and that nothing sounds like nothing, but it's actually enormously important. This new law, HB 142, says that it's only the state legislature that can regulate who gets access to what restrooms. Cities can't do that. School districts can't do that. Nobody else can do that. But then, of course, the legislature has said, we're not going to tell you what restrooms trans people can use. So the bar from HB2 is gone, but it's replaced by a rule that school districts, state agencies, the University of North Carolina, state buildings can have no rule about where trans people or cisgender people use the restroom.
And what is that? What's the impact on that in pre-existing situations? For example, didn't the city of Charlotte have a non-discrimination provision previously that it then withdrew as a part of a compromise for this legislation? Or?
Exactly. So Charlotte had a non-discrimination ordinance that covered LGBT people and specifically addressed the restroom issue, question. In December, as part of an attempt to repeal HB2, this Charlotte City Council repealed that ordinance. So Charlotte no longer has that ordinance, and there are no protections at the city level for trans people or LGBT people in Charlotte. And what this does
But now it's also prevented from reinstituting that, right?
Absolutely. So they can't fix it now. And permanently, this ban on any regulation by anybody in the state other than the state legislature about restrooms is permanent. And so it leaves people like Joaquin in a difficult situation. You can go to your supervisor at work and say, okay, what's the deal? Can I use the men's room or not? I read that state legislation to mean that the supervisor cannot provide an answer because that would be a policy. That's ridiculous.
Let's go to Joaquin Carcaño, a transgender activist in North Carolina. If you have a suit against North Carolina for HB2, which has now been repealed, HB 142 has replaced it. Your thoughts?
You know, HB 142 is just a repackaged HB2 under a different name. As James said, it's been replaced, but we still don't have any safety. We still don't have any protections, and we're still actively restricted from navigating our daily lives.
So how will it affect you? And talk about your activism and the activism that brought North Carolina to the point it's at right now, losing hundreds of millions of dollars because of HB2 in place, and now everything that's happening with the NCAA, pulling the games from North Carolina, and now considering whether or not to consider the new bill, 142, as an adequate substitute.
The fight continues. You know, I think this was a tactic to sort of undermine our momentum and our fight that we've invested a lot in the past year to combat the damage of HB2. But it still continues because the violent discrimination of this legislation it still exists in the state. And so we continue fighting. We continue to ask for boycotts of the state, for the NCAA to not return to North Carolina, and for the state and the nation to continue to see that North Carolina is actively discriminated against our community.
And what's your response to those legislators who you consider to be allies in this fight, who were supportive of the LGBT community and then ended up voting for this particular bill?
They sold us out. I mean, completely. There were empty promises that were made to us leading up into elections. We, gave a lot of support, and not just, the LGBT community, but our own allies and our friends, our family, our communities. We all really threw our support behind these legislators that said that they would protect us going forward, that they would fight for a complete repeal of HB2, and that's been compromised. Our lives, our rights have been compromised, and we've been sold out.
Last year, Democracy Now! Spoke to Peyton McGarry, a student at University of North Carolina at Greensboro and a plaintiff in the federal lawsuit filed to challenge the new North Carolina law, HB2 at the time. He told us his story, why he got involved in the case.
I am a 20-year-old student at UNCG in accounting and business. Give you a little bit of backstory. I grew up in a small town in North Carolina. At about the age of 15 or 16, I started feeling different. Something just felt a little bit off. I started coming out to my family, my friends, and seeing a therapist based on gender and all that good stuff at 17 years old, and started hormone replacement therapy at 18 years old. And here we are. So it means a lot to me that this lawsuit is taking place just because of my own experiences with opposition to my gender. And I've experienced a lot of just distressing discrimination in North Carolina, and I can't believe that we're passing laws now that actually not only enable it, but in some cases require it.
So, Joaquin Carcaño, the lawsuit is actually named for you, Carcaño versus McGrory. Now, of course, the new governor, it'll change to versus Cooper. Can you tell us your story, how you came to be the named person in this lawsuit challenging the state of North Carolina?
Yeah, definitely. The ACLU and Lambda Legal had reached out to individuals at UNC once HB2 was passed, and I had received some communication. They were interested in talking to affected students and staff members at UNC, and I responded and just said, this is who I am, let me know if I can be of any help, and the conversation went from there. But, in regards to getting involved in this fight, I am a transgender male, a transgender Latino male. I'm from Texas, where similar violent discrimination and legislation is trying to be passed, but also in my role at UNC, I serve the trans Latina community, and that is really, really important to me to be able to fight for my community on very many levels, but also offer some protection to the trans Latina community that I serve that face lots of discrimination and violence day in and day out. So this is not just about me personally, but about my broader community and who I serve in my personal life, my professional life, and being able to offer whatever kind of protection I can. And this was an opportunity to take on this fight.
And James Essex, what about the implication across the country for the continuing battle in North Carolina?
Well, I think at this point, all eyes are on the NCAA and to try and figure out what it is they do. Do they decide that the small changes in the law in North Carolina are enough to, excuse the discrimination, and they're going to sign off on that and allow the state to once again host championships? Or are they going to stand firm and stand up for the principle that they stood up for at the middle of last year when they said, you know what, this is not acceptable? And the reason that all our eyes are on the NCAA is that there's a range of other states that have similar HB2-like bills that they're considering. Texas is prime among them. And I think if there's a sense that, the business community doesn't care, that the sports community doesn't care about these laws, we're going to see more of these, and there's going to be more harm to LGBT people all over the country.
We want to thank you both for being with us. James Essex, director of the ACLU LGBT and HIV Project, and Joaquin Carcaño, speaking to us from Chapel Hill, transgender activist, student at University of North Carolina, plaintiff in the ACLU lawsuit. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. When we come back, we'll be joined by Reverend Barber to talk about other issues that were involved with HB2 and also this 50th anniversary of the speech Dr. King gave here at Riverside Church in Manhattan, speaking out against the war in Vietnam. Reverend Barber gave the sermon yesterday at Riverside Church. Stay with us.